Okay, as you know, this week we're concentrating on post-traumatic stress disorder. There's a lot more information in your book that's important to read, but I want to talk a little bit about some coping strategies that are good for people with PTSD. So why do we talk about this? PTSD can bring with it a lot of risk factors for other mental health disorders, including anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and substance use disorder. Substance use disorder happens when people with PTSD are trying to self-medicate the symptoms that they're dealing with. So some social coping strategies, so things that can help people with PTSD and the people around them. So the more the person that's dealing with PTSD knows about it, the better they can educate people in their family and their friend groups about PTSD and get that kind of emotional support that they need. Support groups are a great choice for them. Different kinds of classes, again, for education purposes. There's even online support groups for people with PTSD. Very often some of these online groups are very specific, so they're for veterans or people that have suffered domestic violence or physical abuse. Connecting with others who share your experiences can really help someone who feels isolated to avoid that isolation and help them know that they are not alone. Isolation is not good for people with PTSD. They want to do it sometimes because they're afraid of other people and they're afraid of being totally overwhelmed if they're out in public, but isolation is not a positive thing for them. And then again, being with supportive friends and family can really help their overall outlook. Sometimes when they're feeling alone, it just makes them feel that much more hopeless. Some emotional coping strategies that we'll hear about and read more about over the semester. Mindfulness is a really big one. A lot of people are resistant to mindfulness because they think it's only meditation. Meditation is a piece of it, but it's not the only piece. Mindfulness, if you see the definition there from the person who founded this movement, it's an awareness that arises through paying attention in the present moment. So finding something that they can really concentrate on and think about. So let's say it's a flower. They might want to say, well, what does that flower smell like? What does it feel like when you touch it? Is it soft? Is it thorny? And then also just to get an idea, to have a few minutes where that's all they're thinking about in that moment and not let outside thoughts come in. It's a skill that takes time to work on, but with the right therapist, mindfulness can be really helpful for people with PTSD. Some other therapies for PTSD are prolonged exposure, cognitive processing therapy, and EMDR. And again, I will provide more information about those specific therapies, plus there is information in your book. Again, meditation with or without mindfulness with it can be helpful. People are surprised sometimes to know how much exercise can help with PTSD. Exercise has a positive impact on dopamine in the brain, and it really helps people feel better. Sometimes they think it's going to sap their energy, when in fact it gives them more energy. And then some people find keeping a journal to be very, very helpful. It gives them a chance to write about some of their experience and maybe get some stress out in the writing process. It also helps them to look back on some of their experiences and realize maybe how much they've grown over time. Triggers are important to understand. People with PTSD can have multiple triggers that people might not think about. And these triggers, again, can lead to isolation because people don't want to deal with things that remind them of whatever trauma they suffered. Triggers can be both external and internal. So internal triggers, as I mentioned, people tend to want to be alone, but loneliness is a real trigger for a lot of people. They need supportive people around them. Anger can sometimes be a trigger for people with PTSD. Sadness is another one. Certain memories. People sometimes go back over memories over and over again in their mind, which can really exacerbate their PTSD symptoms. And then physical pain will sometimes trigger their symptoms. External triggers. News programs. Think of programs that you've watched that might have footage from Afghanistan or Iraq. And people who've lived through that war The news programs and the stories about the war can sometimes trigger people. Certain movies or TV programs, again, someone who maybe suffered domestic violence, watching a TV program where they're depicting domestic violence may be a trigger. Certain smells can be very, very powerful. Certain holidays. For some people, Christmas could be a real trigger because they remember sad Christmases with their family or Christmases that didn't work out well. And then other things that can be triggers are reminders of trauma. So going into a place maybe where you were traumatized can bring that trauma back. And again, I come back to the news programs and movies. These video screens can be powerful in terms of impacting someone with external triggers. Some important things to help with healing from PTSD. The first one is to avoid drugs and alcohol. Again, avoid that self-medicating that people will do sometimes to feel better. People that don't get enough sleep can really suffer more from PTSD symptoms, so sufficient sleep is important. Again, exercise is very important. Eating a healthy diet, having good nutrition helps people heal. Caffeine is a big one that people need to avoid. They also need to limit screen time and avoid isolation.